the greatest corrosive effect on the Putin regime. We've discussed this before, Stig. Is this basically run by spooks, or is it basically run by crooks? And the crooked and spookish elements are always at in tension with each other, and it's hard to run a successful mini superpower when everyone is looting all the time. And I think that underlying dynamic can always break up into onto the surface.
Shoigu might not be a household name here in the UK, but for the past 12 years, he's been the Russian defense minister. Until last night, that is, only a few days after Russian forces launched a surprise attack across the border towards the Ukrainian city of Kharkiv. Russian President Vladimir Putin announced that he, a longtime ally, was being removed. What effect will the move have on the war? And what does it say about Putin's plans? Edward Lucas is a Times columnist and security strategist. Very useful man to talk about this type of thing. He always knows what's going on. Morning, Edward.
Good morning.
Talk about the criminology of this. How significant a move is it?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that this isn't over yet. There's going to be more happening. Sergei Shoigu is perhaps not a household name, but he is a remarkable political survivor. He's not, if you put it in British politics, he's like Michael Gove, but going right back to the 1990s, if you imagine Michael Gove having served in every cabinet since the John Major era. Not done yet. He's been moved away from being defence minister, which he has done for a number of years, to another important job as secretary of the Security Council. The next question that comes up will be whether they will change the chief of the general staff, Valery Gerasimov, who is the author of the disastrous initial conduct of the war in Ukraine, and an exceptionally servile character who's never told Putin how badly things have been going. So it may be that that's the next thing to happen. Shoigu's replacement is an economist, a hardline, old-fashioned economist called Andrei Belousov. And I think his job is just to keep the war machine going as Russia moves into full-scale war economy. So to take another historical analogy, he might be the Albert Speer of Putin, Russia, just as Speer was the economic mastermind of Hitler's Germany.
And I guess the question, Edward, is that full-scale war economy and the success that they've had and the comparative lack of success Ukraine has had, not least because they've been waiting for Western weapons. Does that suggest that the war is going to go on for a long time and Russia could have quite high hopes of at least proceeding relatively successfully?
I wouldn't go that far, Stig. I think that they've clearly had some advantages in the land front, and as you reported today, they've opened a new front around Kharkiv, and that's pushing the Ukrainians quite hard. But the Ukrainians have had some big successes too. But one is in confining the Russian Black Sea fleet to one small corner of the Black Sea because it's afraid of going out, it gets sunk by drones. The other is in long-range strikes on Russia's energy infrastructure and logistics. And this has led to serious disruption of fuel supplies in Russia, and particularly for the front. And that will again be, I think, top of Mr. Belousov's inbox when he arrives at work this morning. It's also worth noting that Shoigu's job was previously held by perhaps the second most important person in Russia, Nikolai Patrushev, who was the head of the Security Council. And he is a very hawkish former KGB guy like Putin, who is both the country's top spy master and in effect, and also the national security advisor, a role that should really be kept separate. And he's been moved, but we don't know to what. I don't think Putin wants to disgrace him, so he'll have to find another job for this man, who is, to some extent, one could almost say, the evil genius of the Putin regime.
I guess the point, though, just finally, Edward, is though this does feel the long haul is there. I mean, Putin, re-elected in obviously unsurprisingly dubious circumstances, but he's there. All that wobble that was there for the first couple of years of the war seems to be gone. The coup that didn't succeed, he's reorganizing his allies around him. It does feel that he's in it for the long haul, and it's not entirely clear what's going to stop that.
Well, I think it's clear the war's going to go on for quite a bit. I wouldn't say that things are going brilliantly for Putin. There was a spectacular sacking just a few days ago of a deputy defense minister, Timur Ivanov, for corruption / treason. And that, I think, was a sign of some rivets popping. Corruption remains, I think, the greatest corrosive effect on the Putin regime. We've discussed this before, Stig. Is this basically run by spooks, or is it basically run by crooks? And the crooked and spookish elements are always at in tension with each other, and it's hard to run a successful mini superpower when everyone is looting all the time. And I think that underlying dynamic can always break up into onto the surface.
Yeah, that's a very, very fair point, as ever. Edward, great to speak to you. Thank you for joining us.
Ukraine's top military commander has admitted that the situation in the northeastern Kharkiv region has become difficult. Russia claims to have captured several more villages, taking advantage of Ukraine's shortage of both manpower and weapons. Maria Avdiva is a security expert in Kharkiv and joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us on the programme. Can you just give us an update of the latest on the ground there, given those claims overnight?
Yeah, during the night, several more villages were captured by Russian troops. This is the villages to the north of Kharkiv and around Vovchansk, which is a city that lies on the river, just on the border with Russia to the north of the city of Kharkiv. So this means that Russian troops are still advancing despite Ukrainian attempt to defend and to protect the further villages and towns on their way. But there is a hope, and I think there are signs that this advance will be stopped because Ukraine is redeploying more troops and Ukraine has more defense lines ahead. Basically, what happened, Russia managed to go along the first defense line, but there's also the second and the third one. The only problem is that those defense lines, especially, for example, the third one, they are too close to the city itself. So in the bad case, if Russian troops succeed in getting closer to the city, this will put Kharkiv, the second Ukrainian largest city, in the danger of the artillery fire shelling, which we have seen in the first days and months of invasion.
And clearly a really precarious situation there for people living in that area. What happened with the first line of defence? You mentioned that Russian troops have made it through that first line of defence. There is a second and a third line. Was it under preparedness? Was it underpowered? How did the Russians make it through?
Well, there are different kinds of reports. One is that there is a possibility that the lines of defense were not built too close to the border because that was not possible physically, because this area is constantly under the Russian shelling and it can be seen through. So this was the reason to build them somewhat further. And then what makes it most important and most difficult in the situation is all those people who live in the area, because now they have to evacuate urgently, immediately. Actually, the evacuation is already happening for some time, for 2 days now. They are evacuated to Kharkiv because the situation in the city is more or less calm. And this is their second time. They have already been through all the horrors of occupation and they know what Russian occupation brings. So this is why they are fleeing now, not to go through it again. But the situation is worrying. You are completely right.
And how much are the questions being asked about Western funding and whether or not, any extra weaponry could have made a difference here?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest issues. And I think that Russians are taking advantage in terms of the timing, because they know that all that Western weapons were not, it wasn't here in time, and it's still not here. So the package was just announced and there was not enough time for all these weapons to come to the front lines. And this is why Russia is attacking at this moment, because they know that Ukrainian army does not have enough, and this is a time. So they take advantage on that. If Ukraine had the weapons in time, I doubt that Russia will try to attack in this direction.
We've also seen overnight reports that Sergei Shoigu has been replaced. What does that mean for this conflict?
Well, if we look at the shifts in the higher Russian leadership, this probably means that Russia will bring and flow even more money into the war. So, meaning that all the Russian economy will work for war effort. And this means that Putin and Russia are preparing for a long war. And this is why this Ukrainian claim that this is not only about Ukraine has more grounds, because we clearly see that they're like, they don't do it just for Ukraine. They are preparing for a larger, bigger war. And this means that they will go further if Russia succeeds in Ukraine.
Maria Avdieva, thank you for joining us. Maria Avdieva, there, a security expert in Kharkiv.